This is the
We are
B-roll.
back for a special
An
edition.
encore.
It's like we're a rock band coming out afterwards. At the encore of the good
Sure.
deeds. So we've got Dan Deppen and Chad Erbshot on with us as well, talking.
Yes.
Uh,
Talking about who's got the worst house
Yeah.
in the country, and it's quite a face-off.
Yeah.
and BPOs and other things.
I actually never talked about the one I'm rehabbing right now in St. Louis. Well, East St. Louis, Belleville, Illinois, to be exact. Probably the worst house I've ever had to rehab in my life. My budget going in was mid-20s. I'm at 55 right now.
Oh,
Ow.
However,
Wow.
the first realtor told me it was only worth 50 if fixed up, and now I'm at 100. So
That's good.
I could have sold it at a loss, as everybody has talked about earlier. But I have endeavored, since I got into notes, to never lose money once again on real estate. There's too many different exit strategies where you can make money regardless of how you do it. So if worse comes to worse, I'm going to sell this sucker on a seller finance deal, which I'll probably end up doing. And, I may or may not. If I get a retail price for a conventional mortgage that I need something for my pain and suffering, I want to make at least 10 grand, which will probably make about $5 an hour after all the time put into it. But I didn't lose money on it, so
That's what counts.
yeah.
And Chad, just because again you mentioned earlier your experience, and you've got vast real estate experience, and you just mentioned that you had a budget that went over double. So I say that because it happens to everybody, but for people who are newer that really haven't done a lot of this, for the most experienced people like Chad, it happens. So just be very careful. And, again, when you're doing rehabs, the biggest thing I'll mention to people is, make sure you have a schedule of values, and how people are getting paid is one of the most important things that's involved, because rehabs can go take a left turn so quickly. I have somebody I know who wasn't a rehab, we're doing new construction, and I offered to review their plans and help them on this property, and their budget was $400,000. And they ended up spending $700,000 on their property. And this was simple things like they dropped their basement to get an extra foot in the basement, but never had the engineer look at where the sewer lateral was out in the street. So basically they didn't have the pitch now, so they had to put in a sump. They had to pump it now as well. And
Nice.
Things like that.
yeah. One of my advantages on my rehab is my property manager lives 2 doors away.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's going to kind of bird dog the rehab. And then when it comes time to put a renter in, he wants to find the renter. So I figure that's probably a good thing if he's, he'll hopefully find someone good if he's going to have to be their neighbor. So
Hopefully he has a friend or family member who already has their eye on it.
Hey,
Yeah.
Chad, I want to go back to something you put where you said you never use BPOs. You just take the bottom 5 of all comps. So
I'm excited because I think they're worthless too, basically.
Yeah, so back in the day when I first started buying Foreclosures, 2012-13, right from the county auctions, I was pulling my hair out because there'd be a couple hundred a week that were coming up, and I'm like, how the hell am I going to peg the value of all these? Zillow back then was even way worse than it is now for values. So I developed a tool that I haven't really actually tweaked it lately, but what it does is it pulls 25 nearest comps in the area for each property. And it's not all that accurate, but it's somewhat accurate. But I developed it at the time to get an ARV of a property. So I was pulling the top 5 comps. Well, when I started investing in notes, I tweaked it a bit more so that I can pull the bottom 5 and the top 5. So when I have an ARV range, which is somewhat accurate, so the high end value, and then I've got the low end value, and almost predominantly every single house you take back, especially lower value ones, are going to be in the low value range, because if they're not paying their mortgage, not paying their taxes, there's no way they're putting money into it. So it almost always falls within the bottom 5. that's just kind of like when I go in to do a bid analysis, I pull those.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're way freaking off. But obviously I always validate those bottom 5 comps just to make sure that it's in the ballpark. And if it's higher than that, then it's a plus, but sometimes it's even lower. So
Now, do you still have someone put eyes on the property for you?
oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I want to get to is you still have, and I've done that a lot of times, and it's a mixed bag for me. I go back and forth. If I've got like 8 assets under agreement, instead of trying to chase 8 people down to go take pictures and pay them like $30 on Craigslist or $25, sometimes I'll just call Dickie and be like, okay, Dickie, just get me these 8 because of time. But you're right. I take the values of a BPO with a grain of salt. And what I'll do is I'll run an AVM and data tree as well as look at what they provide and come up with my own value. And I know people will look at, all they do is look at the number on a BPO and not actually look at the information in there. And typically these agents are way off.
Yeah. Another thing I do too is I'll get local agents to give me a CMA.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does is obviously gives you way more than just the 3 comps they're using in the BPO.
Yep.
So I'll get a 1-line CMA where they'll give all the comps within a mile or half a mile, every property, but I'll take that and then data tree will give most of that, but I find realtors in each jurisdiction have way more comps, so I'll pull those in and then put them into a spreadsheet or whatever, and filter them out by square footage and age and what have you. So that typically narrows it down. And oftentimes I'll tell the agent, okay, I think this property's worth that, and get them to agree to it. So,
because the other thing with BPOs too is, sometimes you got to look at the comps and actually go online and look at them. Because I've seen BPOs from one company who I no longer use anymore, which is National. So I want to just be clear that because I mentioned Dickie's company earlier, this isn't his company, and I still use Dickie, and stuff I get from him is usually pretty good. But this other company I used to use, they'd use some of these BPO comps, and these would be houses that were like updated with new kitchens and baths, and try and sell, say it's, this is what the property's worth. And I'm like, okay, I can tell you right now, this person hasn't paid in 2 years, so I highly doubt it's got a new kitchen and bath inside this house.
Yeah, that's one thing I definitely do. So when I pull those bottom 5 comps, I'll look at each one of those, and if it's an as-is property, then I'm pretty darn sure that the mortgage in question that we're bidding on is likely similar to those. So,
whoops.
It may be conservative a lot of times. I may not win a bid because of that, but the old saying, the best deal is the one you never get, right? So.
And we were also just talking, before you had stepped away briefly with Dan, because Dan is in the process of doing a fix and rent, because the property right now is his best exit strategy is kind of fix it and rent it. And I know you had a lot of experience doing a lot of renovation side, but I wasn't sure if you typically, exit your assets or you keep them as rentals.
Well, I used to do turnkey rentals as well, like back before I got into notes. And I actually heard part of that, Dan. You just have to run your numbers. You got to see, the 1% rule. That's good in theory, but depends on how much the taxes are. Depends how much, if you're renovating the property, obviously there's not going to be much maintenance. But taxes are usually the big kicker in there. Now, if it's in Indiana, most places I know in Indiana, the taxes aren't too bad, so it probably won't take that big of a chunk. If it was in Cleveland, taxes are freaking like 3 or 4% of the value of the property. So you want to be hitting the 2% rule in Cleveland.
Pennsylvania, the same. Pennsylvania taxes are with the school taxes.
Yeah, exactly. So,
if you do it as a turnkey rental, how long do you rent it before you go to sell it? Like, what's the seasoning on a renter like?
Oh, it could be the first month.
Okay.
You don't need seasoning. A lot of buyers are going to want to see the application to see what their credit history is and their strength. So as long as you got you have a good renter in there and you have a property manager that vets them properly, then it shouldn't be a problem turning around. I'm sure you probably heard of Roofstock. Roofstock's a good place to put your rentals now.
No.
Yeah,
I'll check that out.
Google on Roofstock. Yeah, they're like the preeminent, man. These guys have only been around a couple of years, and it's amazing what they've done the last few years. And they've actually just came up with fractional ownership. So I just saw a news article yesterday where you can actually buy a portion of a rental now. So it's kind of cool how they come up with that concept.
How do you spell their name, Chad?
Roofstock, ROFFSTOCK, I believe. .com. Yeah.
I think it's ROOF, not ROFF.
No. Right.
So
a lot of turnkey buyers are buying them because what they do is they'll send out an inspector. They'll do the inspections. They're really protecting the investors because there's been a lot of people ripped off in the turnkey rental business the last.
How is fractional investing not an SEC violation?
I don't know how they're doing it. I didn't really read much into it, but I think they might be doing it through security. I don't know. I didn't really look into it.
I'm just curious because it's like no difference. They're raising money. You have it's passive. It's almost like a crowdfunding type thing where, I'm wondering how they regulate it because I know with Bitcoin and stuff, that's what they're trying to get to is a lot of fractional ownership of things. And I'm like, well, how is that not a violation?
Yeah, they may be doing it as a security because I think they said they're retaining 10% ownership of each property or something like that. So, but the idea is they're allowing people to invest. Say someone's got 50 grand as opposed to putting it in one property and the freaking tenant leaves the next day and you're out rent for a couple months and then the turnover costs. They're allowing you to take, say, out of that 50 grand, splitting up into 5 properties. So you put 10 grand into each. So that way you're allocating your risk across 5 properties. That's kind of what I understood from it. I'm like, oh, that's a pretty interesting concept that they're doing that now. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You're starting to see a lot more of Wall Street and other companies like this getting into single family rentals and creative things like this. I'm interested to see how it works out once the markets turn a little bit and how they manage these properties.
Mm-hmm.
Casey asked if you can get a longer lease, is it more attractive to a potential buyer?
Oh, is he asking me that?
I'll throw it out to everybody. I have my opinions. I'm curious what other people think.
It definitely helps, but it all comes down to the strength of the renter, their credit scores and their past rental history and all that. So, a good vetting, a good property manager that vets the borrower is worth his weight in gold, really. Higher the credit score, the better, I think, usually. And the income too, obviously, it's the same rules of getting a mortgage. You want to see it 3 times or more on the rental application. So,
yeah, in Maryland, you have to offer a 2-year lease, but it's state law. But typically, I don't like to go more than a year because you just want to make sure about the borrower they pay, but also you want to make sure the borrower's not calling you every 2 days because the shower head's too low or the toilet's not flushing or some renters can be a little more high maintenance and you don't want to have to deal with that for multiple years. You can always take the first year and then if they're doing well, just roll them and re-ante them up.
I have to go to sleep, guys.
Yeah, Gail's over here is so
not expecting to do another episode.
Yeah.
Okay, so Casey is asking questions of Dan. So Dan is Casey's asking Dan if your property is somewhere that it would work as an Airbnb.
No, this is in Muncie, Indiana. So I'm guessing there's not a lot of Airbnb. What it does have going for it though is it's very close to Ball State. So I think as and some other things. So I think as a rental it'll be okay, but Airbnb is probably not an option. Although it'd probably be better than the hotels there, because the hotels are pretty dirty and horrible. I ended up flying out there last December when I realized I had the hoarders, because I wanted to meet with the clean out folks, and I interviewed a bunch of contractors and had a bunch of people look at it because this one was so extreme. I wanted to go out there and check everything out myself. And I have some other notes in the area too, so I kind of killed a bunch of birds with that stone.
I just want to encourage you, Dan, to consider the possibility that it might actually be a good Airbnb area. Is Ball State, do they have like resident students? Like, do you know what the out-of-state residency is?
I don't. I can check that out.
Yeah, because, you know, a college that's got stuff going on, with parents come, families, there's like, it would be interesting to look at the school schedule to see how many, you know, events there are that people might come to. So you have probably heard of Walter Wooford in Jackson, Mississippi?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so Walter has a whole bunch of Airbnbs in Jackson, Mississippi. And, you know, I somewhat incredulously said to him, like, seriously, like, you have that many people coming to Jackson, Mississippi? And he's like, yes. And it's true of most places. Like, we, of course, think of the truly exciting destinations, San Francisco, Chicago, LA, Philadelphia a little bit. But yeah, people go all over the place for all different reasons. So it would definitely be worth, like, you should just go on Airbnb and see what's in Muncie and what it rents for.
Yeah, check that out, because I had not thought about that at all. So
it just seems like a lot of work to do an Airbnb.
Well, you need a manager just like you do with a rental property, like a normal rental.
Well, I got a guy 2 doors away that can manage it. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
You need a cleaning crew and you need a manager.
the logistics of it actually wouldn't be too bad probably in this case.
Yeah, well, the visitors pay the cleaning fee. So you really just have to pay Airbnb, which is not very much, and the manager.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and the income can be, you know, a lot higher than a conventional rental.
Yeah.
You have to check
That's
though.
kind of, you know, I never thought about this, but like turnkey Airbnbs, like that's probably a great business for people who can't get the stuff set up themselves.
Yeah.
Like if you have like proven income in an Airbnb that's bigger than a normal rental, like you should be able to charge a premium price for it. Plus, you know, a lot of people do Airbnbs by renting properties instead of buying them and just, you know, making money on the spread. But part of the reason that landlords, you know, not everybody loves it on first hearing, but it's actually a great deal for a landlord if you agree to like do automatic rent deposit into their accounts. You let them know, this thing is gonna get cleaned like regularly. The visitors use it very lightly, like they don't wear out the appliances, they barely use anything. They're vetted by Airbnb. You know, there's a lot of advantages to it.
I've already sent you the email, Gail, of the business plan of buying property from owner finance people under land contract and then turn around and Airbnb it out to people. So you're not even on the title. You have it on the land contract. You got the low monthly payment, the low down payment, and you're going to Airbnb it. There you go.
That is awesome. If only there was a land contract property that didn't need like thousands of dollars in renovation to be somewhat acceptable to an Airbnb person.
There's got to be one out there.
Yeah.
So, Dan, can I interject? Do you know what your cap rate might be on this if you were to fix it up and rent it out?
Yeah. So from what I'm told by a couple of different people, there are realtors and the property manager, it should rent for between $1,000 to $1,200 a month.
Yeah.
And I think when I rehab it, I'm probably going to be, by the time I rehab it, I'll be all in for probably 95,000, maybe 100,000. If I sell it as is, well, which I've already kind of started the rehab, but if I were just to sell it and not do it, it would probably be at least a 20K loss at that point. So that was the trade-off.
Could you, if you fixed it and sold it, would it break? Would you bring you closer to even, or would you still be a little upset?
Yeah. So the ARV is supposed to be like 115 to 120 fixed up.
And how much work does it need, budget-wise?
It's about 25K to 30K in work. It's tearing out the kitchen and 2 bathrooms and flooring and paint. I mean, luckily, structurally, it was okay. There's like exterior painting, and there's a tree that's got to be removed, and some other odds and ends. I mean, it's a bunch of stuff. I mean, it's pretty. I mean, these hoarders were pretty bad. I mean, luckily the house was okay underneath that, but the whole thing is pretty repugnant.
Oh, was that the video you put on Facebook, Dan?
Yeah, that's the one.
It's like a 3-bedroom house.
Yep, that's it.
They had 4 dumpsters or something crazy. Wow.
Yeah, they pulled out 3 40-yard dumpsters
Oh my
for the
God.
trash, and then 1 20-yard dumpster. And then I guess there was so much stuff they were like overweight because they ended up charging me a little bit extra later.
So that was not construction debris. That was literally just stuff that was in the house.
Correct. Yeah, there was no structure to be. I mean, luckily, I was worried at first we're going to have to tear out the drywall. There's a couple of holes in the drywall I got to repair, but no, that's all in. It's not construction debris. They left a boat in the backyard. They left about 5 lawnmowers. There was, it was about waist deep throughout most of it. It was probably about chest deep in the garage, and there were. Yeah, there. I don't know how much more. There was a lot of gross stuff inside there too. It was, yeah.
Wow.
I've got a property right now in Indiana where we're wrapping up the forfeiture, which actually the notice expires on Monday. But there was essentially about a dumpster worth of material out in the yard that I just had to clean up because I got a call from the county that they're like, there's like a dumpster worth of stuff out in the yard from the house. So I'm thinking, oh, great. Hopefully they've already emptied out the house, or is it going to be opposite, that the house was so filled with so much junk I'm going to go in there and need to probably pull out 2 more dumpster loads in this house, because it's amazing how much stuff you can pack into like 1,000 square foot home. How many dumpster loads of junk?
Yeah, I just did a forfeiture in Cincinnati. The home was just under 1,000 square feet, and they pulled out 46 yards out of that one. So they weren't quite full on hoarders, but it was a lot of stuff. Oh yeah, the other thing I should mention too is when I the one in Muncie, the original contractor that was going to do the clean out, they said, well, we use the HUD schedule. We charge $50 a cubic yard. We'll just let you know when we're done.
Yeah.
And I was like, no. I need fixed price, quote. And they came back. They wanted $17,000 just to do the clean out.
Oh my God.
And then I got another contractor. They came back. They quoted $13,000.
Wow.
And what I ended up doing was I talked to somebody here in Denver who does fix and flips and stuff. And he's like, oh no, I've run into this, no problem. He's like, just order the dumpsters yourself, go on Craigslist and find some laborers.
Yeah.
And so I ended up, the dumpsters cost almost $2,000 altogether for the 4 dumpsters and the overages.
That's not bad.
But I found a small crew of guys. It was a guy and his 2 sons out of Indianapolis. Did the whole cleanup for $1,500 and just kicked butt. So
Nice.
for like $3,500, I ended up getting the whole thing.
Yeah,
cleaned
that's
out.
one. That's one thing I found is stuff that is just regular labor work that you don't need, I'll use it, they're not finishing drywall or painting, if it's demo or, trash outs. I find most of my people on Craigslist, same thing, order dumpsters for $500-600 a dumpster and then pay somebody $1,000 on Craigslist. The thing you gotta be careful of is send somebody else by to make sure they actually did the full clean out. Because in one instance, I had somebody who snap pictures of the house, made it look clean. And what they did is they took one room and just threw everything in one room that was left because the dumpster was full. And instead of telling me to get a new dumpster, they didn't want to have to come back. So they just took a bunch of stuff and, threw it in, packed the room up. So I ended up having, paid them and ended up having to get somebody else to do it to finish.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, what I ended up doing was since I wanted to go out there to meet with contractors and see for myself. I met with them the day that they wrapped up, and so I was going to pay them when I got there. So I saw it for myself, and yeah, I did it that way. So it was all good. But I was really impressed. I mean, those guys really kicked butt. They weren't just cheap, but I mean, they really did a good job. So that's fortunate.
As long as you find those people, then you just wish you could fly them all over the country to do all your deals. We have a guy in New Hampshire who's like so awesome, but he's in New Hampshire. He's not near anything else we're ever going to buy.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions? Because I know Gail wants to get to bed, and I'll go spend the next hour looking at a tape or doing something working. So I'll keep myself good.
Anyway, Dan, I would suggest if unless you want to hold this as a rental, I would try to fix it up and sell it.
Okay.
I'm running the math here, and you're looking at like about an 8 cap on your costs, and that's pretty much what the going rate is, or even more on rental properties. I don't know what it's like in Indiana, but you're probably not going to be able to sell it. Like, I hate to burst your bubble, but you're probably not going to be able to sell it for much more for what you're into it if you were to sell it as a rental.
Mm-hmm.
If you can sell it as a retail and get a little bit higher on ARV, go for the 115, 120. You might break even, make a few bucks, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Unless you want to hold it for rental for a couple of years, and you can collect.
No, not really. I mean, I mainly, if I could get out and break even, I'd be pretty happy because I had about 5 different things go wrong.
Yeah.
This was one where I made a few mistakes and a bunch of things broke the wrong way. So if I can get out of it with my butt, I'll be very happy. So.
And then you learn how to do a rehab too. Same token.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you'll never want to do another one.
Exactly. Yeah, like my 25 turned into 55. But,
You're nuts, Chad. You're crazy.
well, the reason it went such higher, I was actually just gonna do a lipstick and a pig and turn around and sell it as a seller finance deal again, like a quasi harbor, but make it look a little prettier. By the time the entire plumbing had to be replaced, all the electrical had to be replaced, furnace, the water heater, the foundation was crumbling, like none of that, and I hired my our favorite first-rate field services to do the initial walkthrough, and this property doesn't look bad. Yeah,
they are keen-eyed.
Oh yeah. Anyway, I mean, it's not their fault, obviously, but
well, a little bit of this.
I was the stupid one that bought the property, so.
I couldn't get them to send me a report because they were saying there's no internet in the area they were in. So I never knew that Maryland didn't have internet.
Yeah, I'm not too sure what happened with them, but anyway, this was part of a portfolio that I bought, like 10 properties or 10 CFDs, and it was actually one I tried to get out of the last minute. And John was like, "There's no freaking way you are getting out of this one if you want the excellent pricing, or you're getting all the other ones." So, yeah, you kind of take one with a grain of salt, right? So,
Gail's gonna hit me.
Flip those babies, Chad.
Yeah.
Gail's gonna slap me for asking one more question, but Chad, I wanted to ask you this because there was that tape that John put out that was from AHP that I know you had looked at prior, and we all keep talking about it being pretty hairy assets, and it sounds like you've actually done a lot of due diligence, maybe you already ordered O&E or BPO or done BPOs on stuff like that. What were some of the things, if you don't mind, just sharing with that? Because when I looked at it, I know that the values of a lot of those assets were way off for what they had pricing on, but I was just curious. And again, there's nothing against the seller in this because they're a very good and reputable company, but those assets, I'm just curious what your thoughts were.
Well, when I got the tape, they didn't actually have values on it, so I ran it through my comp tool and pulled the bottom 5, and a couple of them I was way off, actually. speaking of which, that was a couple of them. I had to go back to the original, the person I got the tape from originally.
Mhm.
And I was just talking to him yesterday. I'm like, yeah, a couple of these are way high. And I'm like, I'm actually want to use their values that they put on the next tape that came out that John sent out, because what I had was way higher than what they have. A lot of them are outside the statute of limitations. Well, specifically in the state of Ohio, there's a new ruling out in the state. Not a new ruling. It depends on which attorney you talk to. There used to be there's always been a 6-year rule on the statute of limitations there, where you can no longer chase the borrower down to collect any further payments from them it's been 6 years since they breached a contract, which basically means the default. That's fine, fun and dandy. So be it. If you buy the loan, you can't try to track them. You can't. It's basically like when they come out of bankruptcy and they have a Chapter 7 and they're personally no longer obligated to pay the debt anymore. You can still foreclose on them. Well, there was a BK ruling that came out last year that basically truncated the statute of limitations to foreclose on the mortgage of 15 years, and they combined it with the statute of limitations on the ability to collect the debt, which is 6 years. So they basically ruled them one and the same. So there's a federal, because BKs are federal, decision that has basically truncated the two into one statute of limitation of 6 years. But it depends on the attorney you talk to, saying, well, that's all hogwash. That's going to get overruled again. It's the same thing as licensing in Maryland, right? It's going to go back and forth, back and forth. So basically, there was a ton on there that were in Ohio that were well beyond the statute of limitations. Well, this new statute of limitations to foreclose. So that wasn't the only one. There's a bunch in Florida that were beyond the 5 years. For new people coming in, I'd highly advise against buying any of these, just because there's. Well, and then for one I found, for instance, had a probate sale, which was in 2012 or 13 or something. It was in the new owner's name. However, they still think that there's a valid loan on this property. I'm like, well, how could that be if it's sold in a probate sale? Yeah. Obviously, the release of a lien was not executed, or there was never a satisfaction mortgage given. That's just one example. Another one, there was a bankruptcy proceeding. How did it go? Oh, they entered into a loan mod. Then he went immediately into a bankruptcy proceeding, and never paid a cent on the loan mod. So I can't remember what state this was in, but it was. I'm like, well, since he didn't pay a cent into the loan mod, and even though he signed it, does that go back now on the statute of limitations that he never paid a cent into it? So there's nothing to be enforced. I looked at 30 or 40 assets, I think, and almost every one of them had some kind of hairy issue with it. So I've been spending way more time than I care for on doing the diligence on these. But it also comes down to a business decision. Are these borrowers going to be savvy enough to come back and have any knowledge of all these rules? And then they're going to hire defense counsel to fight this for them. Well, if you do a bit of homework on these borrowers and find out where they're living and what their incomes are and what have you, kind of gives it the answer right there. So if you can get these at a good enough discount versus the value of the properties, then it's kind of like a risk versus reward at this point.
I thought that once, where I had a property that hadn't paid in a while and had a low UPB, so I picked it up for very low dollar, and let's just say it didn't end well for me. The borrower got an attorney and basically fought it, and based on the problem is based on where the UPB is at, and then maybe what the property's worth. And then if you're going to fight this thing, I mean, these things can cost you 20, 30 grand fighting them, depending on, because typically what these defense attorneys will do is they'll put it into, typically a more liberal court and, submit 30, 40 page claim and file a counterclaim against you for fair debt and some of these other things, all of a sudden, I get it, and the attorney's like, what do you want to do? Spend $30,000 or just let it go. And so it's it can be. I thought the same thing. It's like, okay, this borrower, I looked him up and found out a lot of information about him, and I was like, this borrower is never going to get an attorney, and lo and behold. So I don't buy outside statute of limitations anymore. I'm 0 for 1, and I'm going to keep it that way.
Well, these are all well underwater,
Yeah.
and they all have significant taxes on them, significant code enforcement issues against them, are all the ones I've looked at so far. So I'm thinking that I could come along and just get rid of their headaches. So I think these people are probably sick and tired of dealing with these properties by now, and they just probably want an exit. And AHP's their business model is to keep people in their homes, and they actually mean it, right? They never take any foreclosure, so that's why they're getting rid of all these, because they realize that they can't do anything with any of these borrowers, so they're just selling them off. So as with a lot of hedge funds are like that, right, where they just don't want to take it through the foreclosure and get a bad rap in the community. So
I missed the earlier discussion. Do you guys have any idea why they're taking so long to get back on bids?
I heard there were over 300 bids. 300 people bid.
That's crazy.
Oh, wow.
And there's only 480 assets. Something like that.
I think he said there was over 300, not 300 bids on assets, over 300 people that bid.
Oh my God. That's insane.
That's hard to believe.
I'm glad I got the tape early.
I'm skeptical.
I'm going back and forth with them right now, so on probably a dozen of them right now. So, but I'm not sure I'm going to close on all of them. Probably close on maybe half of those. I'm not sure. We'll see. There was a couple that were like, they were pretty decent in there. However, I haven't even ordered the title reports on these yet, because I usually do all my due diligence up front, like all the collateral review.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than paying $200 a pop and then you don't close on it. You do that 10 times in a month, and that adds up pretty quick.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I try and relay to a lot of investors is, as you set up your businesses, make sure you account for some lost opportunity costs throughout your year, because you order an O&E, a BPO, and have a lawyer review it. There's $400 or $500, and those add up quickly.
Yeah, I've done that all too often.
So, Dan,
I did that at the beginning, and now it's a lot more work on my part to review everything up front and then order the title report, but kind of saves you money in the long run. So
yeah. I think last year I closed on between 60 plus assets, but I think my lost opportunity cost was about 7,000, I think. So just
wow.
Which, one of them was Harbor, that was 7 assets, and I didn't close on a single one. That one hurt. That one was like $3,000. So I had a lot of heartache with Harbor and not buying their assets. So we're still, except for those ones, Gail, we have. I don't think I've bought any other assets from them.
Yes, we don't have Harbor to kick around anymore.
No. I'm still dealing with some of their issues, especially in Pennsylvania. Got a couple there that I bought. The Attorney General is still coming out on that. So
I thought Scott proudly told me that he called them up and explained what we do, and he thought he chilled them out. But are people still being threatened by the Attorney General and PA?
Well, it's quieting down the last couple months, but I'm actually converting mine into note mortgages right now, and I've got an attorney that I've had several conversations with them, and billed me for it, of course, on what we're doing. The conversion was going to be $500, and now they're like up to $2,000. I'm like, whoa, how did this get so high? But just because of Attorney General getting involved, and they're totally on board with what I'm doing. So, and dropping the interest rates down to 6%, because usury laws in Pennsylvania are only 6%, which I didn't know at the time.
Nor did
Mhm.
I. Actually live in Pennsylvania, and I have one conventional note here that's in foreclosure. I've never done a contract for deed.
By the way, for those who are listening, if you're converting notes, I believe Fannie Mae on the website has a note and mortgage template for every state.
Ooh, very
To
cool.
convert from a
Well,
to
just, I
convert.
mean, well, not if you're, I mean, why wouldn't you, if you're converting, just do a cancellation of land contract and then write a new note with mortgage?
I'm not sure. This is how this attorney is doing it. Well, he's calling it like a loan mod slash no mortgage. I don't know. That's what I.
Really. You saw an opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, to build me more exactly.
You're taking advantage of the nice Canadian guy.
He doesn't know I'm Canadian. No one knows I'm Canadian unless they listen to the podcast that I'm on.
I'm sorry. Well, you do have that accent, Chad.
Yes, I do.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I want to
Well, I
thank,
could do this all night.
yeah, Gail's like ready to call it a night. So we'll end our second episode of the evening. Dan, Chad, and everyone else, thanks for joining us this evening. And again, for everybody out there, look forward. Actually, next week, I want to say we're going to have Debbie Mullins on next week, who is bookkeeping for note investors. I know she does. I think Adam Adams introduced me to her, and I believe Wayne Snell and a few other people use her. And we're going to bring her on because as tax year was closing, as people are wrapping up their taxes, a lot of questions out there and a lot of information that I think some of it's correct, some of it's not correct. So we wanted to bring somebody who does the day-to-day work on basically, with QuickBooks or how to do your balance sheets and P&Ls and stuff. She's not an accountant, but she, I think, knows enough to get in trouble. But we'll be talking about some bookkeeping and top 5 things to do and top 5 biggest mistakes that note investors do with their books next week. So with that, I want to say thank you all and go out and do some good deeds.